Have you ever wondered what can happen when someone who has nothing chooses to share the little they have? In a city where everyone seems to look the other way, an orphan girl, alone and hungry, finds solace in a piece of dry bread, the only food she has gotten in days. But the unexpected happens when a stray dog, as thin as she is, appears with pleading eyes. What she does next is more than a gesture of kindness. It is an act of courage. This story begins with hunger, abandonment, and silence, but also with a thread of hope that lights up in the most unlikely place, between an invisible child and a forgotten dog. Have you ever been there? Have you ever felt that the world ignored you, but still chose to do good? Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and get ready. Because what comes after will make you see life in a different way. Amid the indifferent noise of the city, where hurried footsteps cross sidewalks without looking to the sides, a small figure went unnoticed, like a shadow that no one wants to notice. She was a girl of about 9 years old, orphaned, lost between the concrete and abandonment. His hair was tangled, his clothes dirty, his feet bare and injured. But what drew the most attention, at least to those who bothered to look, was the silent twinkle in her eyes. A discreet but insistent shine. A hope that stubbornly did not die, even when everything around said it was too late. She walked slowly without a certain direction, as she did every day. He slept on stairs, asked for leftover food in cafeterias, and received more looks of reproach than words of welcome. And on that cloudy morning, his empty stomach had been writhing for hours. But she was used to the pain, almost as if it were part of herself. Even so, he searched through torn bags and garbage cans for something that could relieve his hunger for a few more hours. And then, like someone who finds a lost treasure, his eyes lit up when he saw something lying on the corner of a sidewalk, a piece of bread. It wasn't big, nor fresh, but for her, it was precious. With trembling hands, he held the bread gently, as if carrying something sacred. Before he could even taste a bite, he looked around and leaned against the nearest wall. She sat down slowly, as if that was the only moment of comfort she would have in the day. The smell of bread, although weak, made the stomach scream louder. Even so, she hesitated. He thought about saving it for later. He knew that hunger would return at night, perhaps crueler than ever. He hid the piece inside the small bag he carried, close to his chest, carefully, as if it were his last possession. Time seemed to stop for a few minutes until a sound cut through the silence around, a groan. Low, suffering. She looked up and saw a few meters away a dog, thin, with his ribs sticking out under his skin, his hair matted, and a look of someone who had also been forgotten long ago. He watched her with a kind of sadness that only those who are truly hungry understand. It did not advance, he didn't bark, he just looked. A pleading look, but at the same time resigned, as if even he didn't believe that anyone would offer him anything. The girl remained motionless for a few seconds, feeling her own heart tighten in her chest. The hunger inside her was real. And yet there was something in the eyes of that dog that spoke louder, a mirror of his own loneliness. Without thinking too much, she pulled out the bag and pulled out the bread. He took a deep breath, divided it in half with his small trembling hands, and held out the piece to the dog, leaving the other on his lap. The animal approached slowly, with unsure steps, as if he was still afraid of rejection. He took the bread with his mouth and slowly walked away, as if he understood that he received more than he deserved. She watched him walk away, disappearing among the cars and the grey of the city. She sat there, with the remaining piece in her hands, but now something had changed. Maybe not in the world, maybe not in pain, but inside it, in the place where hope lives silently. And what she didn't know yet. It's just that that small gesture, so simple and so big, was about to set everything in motion. If this beginning touched your heart, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. And tell me, from which city are you watching this story? Night came without asking permission, covering the city with an icy cloak that hurt to the bone. The sky, without stars, seemed as empty as the heart of that girl, now huddled in a dimly lit sidewalk corner. The rough concrete served as a bed, the thin arm acted as a pillow, and the remaining piece of bread no longer seemed to taste good. She had eaten it hours before, sitting in the same place, watching the lights of the cars passing unhurriedly, each light leaving behind a shadow and carrying away any sign of welcome. People passed quickly, their eyes fixed on their own emergencies, and even those who noticed her looked away as if they wanted to forget what they saw. She had become part of the landscape, an uncomfortable detail that no one wanted to acknowledge. The coldness of the sidewalks was less than the coldness of the looks. There was no shelter, no promise of warmth, just her body shaking, her stomach still tight, and the distant sound of the city functioning normally, as if her pain had no place in the world. The girl cringed even more, trying to protect her bruised feet and frost-bitten toes. The old coat he wore barely covered his shoulders, and the night wind poured through his sleeves like air daggers. His eyes, once attentive, were now tired. But sleep did not come. Sleeping on the street wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Fear mixed with hunger, creating a silent restlessness. She already knew the sounds of dawn, impatient horns, random screams, hurried footsteps, sirens in the distance. Everything was repeated night after night, as if the world refused to stop. It was there in the middle of that noisy silence that the memory appeared. A smell. Something I could almost touch. It was hotcakes. That bakery bread that used to come out of the oven at the right time, when she still lived with her grandmother. He felt the smell spreading through the kitchen, heard the sound of the old radio playing calm music, and for a moment he almost forgot where he was. She remembered her mother humming while combing her hair, the flowered tablecloth on the table, the cup of tea she could only hold with both hands. They were images that came in flashes, like pieces of a good dream interrupted too soon. But those memories, while sweet, hurt. Because now there was no music, no smell of hot bread, no lap. What there was the cold wall behind her back and the certainty that no one would come looking for her. Still, something inside her resisted. A very small point of light, hidden in some corner of the soul, insisted on believing that everything could change. I didn't know how or when, but he believed. It was a kind of hope that was born of total absence, of the need for something to keep breathing. She had no answers, just the will to continue. And sometimes that was all that was left. While sleep stubbornly did not come, she thought about the dog, the way he looked at her, the calmness with which he walked away, as if he had understood more than any human being who had crossed his path in the last few months. There was something about that brief encounter that wouldn't leave her mind. It wasn't just gratitude. It was as if he had left something with her, a strange feeling hard to explain, as if that simple, almost foolish gesture of sharing a piece of dry bread with a stray animal had provoked an invisible movement, a silent gear that began to turn. And even without knowing, even without imagining it, she was right. Because that same night, while the city slept and cars continued to cross avenues inattentively, the dog walked. And he wasn't just wandering at random. He knew exactly where to go, as if carrying a mission, as if that piece of bread had activated in him a memory or a promise. What the girl could not imagine lying on the concrete was that the dog would return, and he would not be alone. Dawn came unhurriedly, still shrouded in a fine mist that covered the buildings like a silent blanket. The city was slowly beginning to awaken, with distant horns and the first hurried steps echoing through the wet ground. The girl, huddled in the same corner where she had spent the night, did not know whether she had slept or just closed her eyes to endure the cold. The body hurt, the muscles were tense, and the feet looked even more injured. The bread was already a memory, and hunger was once again taking up space, a constant presence that she had learned to ignore. Even as she screamed inside, she stretched slowly, trying to get up, when she felt something touch her foot. It was light, but firm. Startled, she pulled her leg back and looked quickly. Her eyes, still heavy, widened when they saw that familiar figure, the same dog from the night before, standing there right in front of her. His tail wagged slowly, his eyes attentive as if he had something to say. But what really caught his attention was what he carried in his mouth, a wallet, old, worn, dirty with dirt and with a half-loose zipper. It seemed to have been forgotten, for a long time somewhere where no one else looked. The animal carefully let go of the wallet, sat a few steps away and kept looking at it, as if waiting for a reaction. The girl, still not understanding, picked up the object gently. The texture was strange, but at the same time familiar. With trembling fingers, he opened his wallet. Inside, there was money. Not much, but more than she'd seen together since she could remember. And along with the folded bills, there was a neatly folded piece of paper. As he unfolded it, the world seemed to spin a little slower. It was a note. The handwriting was delicate, ancient. Simple words, but written with a lightness that crossed time. With each line, the girl's heart tightened. She couldn't explain it, but there was something there that touched a dormant part inside her. Something in those twists and turns of the letters awakened, almost erased memories. She felt, even without understanding, that she knew that writing. It was like recognizing someone's voice even before you heard it. He read every word as if deciphering a secret. The sentences seemed to have been written for her, not now but a long time ago, as if someone had left that message hoping that one day she would find it. It was impossible for that to be a coincidence. The dog, the note, the wallet, everything seemed loaded with meaning, even though she didn't know which one. And it moved her in a way that nothing else had since she lost everything. The dog remained there silently, with its tail beating the ground rhythmically. There was something in his gaze that went beyond instinct. It was as if he knew he had accomplished a mission, as if somehow he understood the importance of what had just happened. The girl looked back at him with her eyes full, speechless but full of questions. She clutched her wallet to her chest. The paper, the lettering, the smell of old leather, all of that was now part of something bigger, a mystery that was formed in pieces, like a puzzle that began to assemble. And at that moment, sitting there among concrete, noise, and oblivion, the girl felt that she was no longer completely alone. Because something had changed, something had begun. And unknowingly, she was already taking the first steps toward a truth that had long been waiting to be revealed. Her hands trembled as they held the unfolded paper, her eyes darting along the lines as if they were reading a piece of their own destiny. The world around him seemed to have fallen silent. Even the noise of traffic, which never stopped now, sounded distant, as if the city had held its breath to hear with it those words that came like a whisper from the past. The paint, though faded, was still legible, and what was written was not much, but it was enough to make the ground beneath the girl's feet disappear for a few seconds. If you found that, maybe fate is giving you back something that was taken from you. She reread it once, twice, 3 times. His heart was racing at an uneven pace. The feeling was of being about to wake up from a dream that I still didn't know if it was good or bad. It was impossible to ignore that sentence. There was something about her that cut deep. It wasn't just the content, it was the way it was. Written. The way of the letters, the gentle inclination, the care in each word. That handwriting had something familiar about it, and the more she looked, the clearer it became. She had seen that writing before. In childhood, on cards, on notes, pasted on the fridge. The memory was fuzzy like fogged glass, but the sensation was clear. With bated breath, he lowered his eyes to the end of the paper, and when he read the signature, his whole body froze. It was not fear, no surprise. It was something deeper, a shock that pierces the soul, because there, at the end of the message, the grandmother's name was written. The same grandmother she believed had been dead for years. The only person who, after the loss of her mother, still seemed to offer some kind of protection in the world. The memory of her voice came back like an echo, a calm, welcoming tone. The smell of coffee, the texture of the blanket on the old sofa, the wrinkled hands caressing her hair. She tried to understand. Was it real? How did that wallet end up in that dog's paws? How was the note from the grandmother, supposedly dead, inside? Why right now? And why with her? The questions came in a flood without pause. The head hurt trying to keep up with the heart, which beat too hard. She felt her eyes water but refused to cry. There was something bigger going on there. An enigma, a key, and as much as I didn't understand it yet, I felt that it wasn't by chance. She looked at the dog, who remained seated, watching her with the same serenity as before. He seemed to expect something. Not a thank you, but a next step. As if she had given her part and now it was up to her to figure out what to do with it. He wasn't just a lost dog, he was a messenger. Or at least, that's how she began to see him. She stood up slowly, still holding her wallet and note, as if they could both disappear at any moment. The wind hit harder, but she no longer felt cold. Inside, there was something moving, something that had been sleeping for a long time. The role of the grandmother in her hands did more than provoke nostalgia. It aroused an urgent need to know, to go after, to look for answers that she didn't even know if she wanted, but now she needed to find. There were no names other than the signature, no address, no date, but the note seemed tailor-made for that moment, and the dog had found its way to her. This could not be ignored. She took a few steps down the sidewalk, her eyes still fixed on the sheet of paper, trying to find clues, traces, anything that could guide her. The dog followed her closely, as if he already knew that the journey was just beginning. She squinted, for a moment, trying to push away the confusion, and even though he didn't know where to start, he understood that he needed to find out where that wallet came from, because something, maybe everything, depended on it. She walked aimlessly, but not without purpose. Each step echoed on the dirty ground of the city, as if it were the first on a road she hardly knew where it led. The note, folded carefully, remained tucked against his chest, like a frail talisman that could unravel in the wind. The dog followed her closely, unhurriedly, attentive, like a silent shadow that refused to leave her alone. And maybe that's exactly what she needed most at that moment, something or someone that just wouldn't go away. As the cars passed by and the noise of the city returned to its usual rhythm, she found herself invaded by memories that did not ask permission to return. Disconnected images of a time that seemed to no longer belong to her, a time when there was a home, there was the smell of food in the air, a door that creaked when it opened, a voice calling its name tenderly, a time when there was mother, father, a table with cutlery and laughter. But all of this now seemed part of a faded dream, of another life that had been snatched from his hands too soon. Tragedy struck like a bolt of lightning on a clear day. An accident, they said, dry words spoken by hurried voices, and after that, silence. She was taken to a shelter without quite understanding why. Different people, beds in a row, rigid schedules, coldness disguised as care. There was no affection there, only orders. And she, too small to react, began to languish inside. When the marks began to appear not only on the soul but on the body, he decided that it was better to flee. He fled without looking back. He fled without knowing if anyone would miss him. But it didn't matter anymore. All he wanted was to disappear. From the place where everything hurt, the streets, as hard as they were, seemed safer than this shelter. At least in them she could choose where to sleep, choose when to speak, or be silent. The world was hostile, but at least it was his. He learned to survive with scraps, to hide from the cold, to understand the signs of the night. And over time she also learned that being invisible was a shield. The less they saw you, the less they hurt you. But the pain never went away. It just changed shape. It was in the looks of contempt, in the silent pushes of the crowded sidewalks, in the harsh words he heard when he asked for food. I was on the days without eating, on the nights when fear was greater than sleep. I was in the constant feeling that I didn't belong anywhere, that no one else cared. On the outside, she was just one of many. But inside, there was a child screaming to be heard. And then, in the midst of so much abandonment, that dog appeared, dirty, hungry, alone, like her. The meeting of the two was not grandiose. No lightning has cut through the sky. No miracles happened. It was just a look. A silent request. It is a gesture. She shared the bread, a piece of almost nothing that meant everything, and he accepted it with sweetness, without invading, without taking by force. He just received it, and the next day he returned. With a gift, with a clue, with something that made the past resurface. Now, as she walked through the streets she knew so well, carrying her wallet and ticket as if carrying a lost part of herself, she perceived something she had never felt so clearly, The feeling that maybe, just maybe, everything she had experienced so far had a hidden thread connecting the pieces, as if somehow that dog knew something she didn't understand yet, as if he carried not only loyalty, but a mission. And as absurd as it sounded, she could no longer deny what she felt. It wasn't just gratitude, it was connection. A connection that went beyond hunger, beyond gesture. It was as if by handing over that note, he had returned more than memories. Had it rekindled something she thought lost forever, the desire to search, the courage to go after it, the desire to know the truth. Because now, with all that paper had awakened, she could no longer pretend that it was okay not to know. He needed to understand what had been left behind. I needed to know what was true, and what has been hidden from her all these years. For days, the girl could not ignore the whirlwind that now inhabited her chest. The note, the signature, the dog's gaze, everything had become an enigma that gave him no peace. It was as if the past had reached out and pulled her back hard, breaking the barrier of forgetfulness that she herself had built to survive. He could no longer wander the streets with the same apathy as before. Every corner seemed to contain a sign. Every anonymous face seemed to hold an answer that had not yet been revealed. The only certainty was that the dog knew something, and she needed to understand what. The animal now followed her wherever she went. It was like a silent extension of her own soul. She slept a few steps away, with her body leaning against the icy wall, as if to ensure that she was not alone. When she got up, he got up too. When he stopped to rest, he lay down nearby, with his eyes half closed but always alert. Over time, she noticed that he seemed restless. Sometimes he sniffed the ground with intensity, walked a few meters and came back. Other times he looked at her with an urgency that only those who pay attention understand. That's when instinct spoke louder. Something about her said that she needed to follow that behavior. I needed to let him guide. On the third day after the reunion, she made a decision. He returned to the place where he had first found the dog, a narrow alley between two old buildings where the smell of garbage and humidity was strong, but where, for some reason, he seemed at ease. She sat there for hours, sitting on a pile of old boxes, watching. The dog paced back and forth as if waiting for something he couldn't name, and then, without warning, he stopped. The snout pointed upwards, as if it had picked up something that no one else could feel. The hairs on his back bristled slightly. He turned to her and began to walk, this time with determined steps, as if he finally knew the way. She didn't hesitate. He got up and followed in the agile footsteps of the one who was now more than a companion. It was his only clue. They went down hills, crossed avenues, entered narrow streets that she had never noticed before. The city seemed to transform around them. Gradually, modern buildings were left behind, giving way to old houses, peeling walls and trees that advanced along the sidewalks with exposed roots, like veins pulsing under the concrete. It was an old neighborhood forgotten by time, where the sounds were quieter and the air carried a smell of wet earth. After almost an hour of walking, the dog stopped in front of a rusty iron gate. The house behind it was a pale yellow, with wooden windows and a garden filled with tall herbs and surviving flowers. There was something melancholy about this place, but at the same time comforting, as if time had stopped there, waiting for someone to return. The animal sat down before the gate and looked at her. He didn't bark, he didn't cry, he just stared, and she knew it was there. With his heart racing, he pushed the gate, which creaked shrilly but gave way. He entered slowly, feeling his eyes explore every detail. The dog followed her closely, unhurriedly. When they reached the balcony, she saw that the front door was ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry or was waiting for a visitor. Upon entering, the smell of old wood and objects stored for a long time took the air. The ground creaked underfoot. The walls were covered with dusty paintings, bookshelves with worn-out books, and a rocking chair that still swayed slightly, perhaps moved by the wind or by memories that refused to leave. She walked with soft steps, as if respecting the silence of a sacred place. On a table there was a broken cup, a folded handkerchief, and next to it a frame turned down. When he lifted her up, the image inside her made her legs tremble. It was an old photo. In it, An elderly woman hugged a child. And that child was... Her time stopped for a few seconds. That image was not an illusion. It was not a made-up memory. It was real. She touched the glass with her fingers as if she had to feel it to believe it. And it was at that moment that he heard a noise coming from the side of the house, a door that opened with care. Frightened, she turned around. An elderly lady, her hair tied up in a loose bun and her skin marked by soft wrinkles, entered with, say, bucket in her hand. When he saw the girl, his eyes widened, but not from fear. It was something deeper, recognition. The woman dropped the bucket without realizing it. They stood there, the two of them, staring at each other for a long moment. And then, with a choked voice, the elderly woman said her name in a whisper charged with emotion. There was no doubt that woman knew her. The girl felt her whole body shiver. A strange energy invaded her, as if she had finally been pulled out of oblivion. The lady explained that she was a neighbor of the girl's grandmother. She said that they were very close, and that her grandmother, even at her advanced age, never gave up looking for her. She said that for years she knocked on doors, called shelters, walked down streets she had never walked before. And every night when he returned home without answers, he wrote notes. She left messages, prayers, and even separate objects in case one day her granddaughter returned. The dog was his inseparable companion, and before she died, she embraced him and repeated, like a wish thrown to the wind, that he would find her. That she believed it until the end. The impact of those words was like a whirlwind inside. The girl could barely breathe. Everything made sense and at the same time seemed impossible. But the pieces were falling into place. The wallet, the ticket, the dog. She had not been forgotten. His story was not over. She was just asleep, waiting for the right moment to wake up. And now that that moment had come, she knew she had to keep going. Because there, in that house where time seemed to keep secrets carefully, there was still much to be discovered. The girl remained motionless before the woman, as if every word spoken there had the power to reorder everything she knew about herself. It was difficult to assimilate. Time seemed to slip slowly through my fingers, and yet every second seemed full of meaning. Her chest contracted in a mixture of relief and pain, relief from knowing she hadn't been forgotten, pain from all that had been lost in the time she walked alone. The dog, lying a few steps away, watched the two with the same calm and deep look as always, as if he knew that this was the exact moment for which everything had happened. The lady led her gently to the living room of the house. The environment, still preserved despite the passage of time, brought memories that she did not know if they were real or just the result of a deep desire. The smell of old wood, the sound of footsteps on the floor, the curtain fluttering slowly. In the breeze, everything had a welcoming melancholy to it. On a small table in the corner of the room rested a blue-covered notebook, a little worn at the edges, with slightly yellowed leaves. The neighbor picked it up carefully, as if handing it something sacred, and held it out to the girl. She accepted the notebook with both hands. His fingers touched the cover as if they were recognizing a familiar skin. When I opened the first page, time stopped. The handwriting was the same as the note, that elegant, firm, and serene line. And there, in the lines written with so much zeal, there was what no words spoken until then had been able to fully express: love. On each page, loose thoughts, reflections on life, memories written with nostalgia, prayers repeated with faith. The grandmother wrote everything down, as if recording every beat of a heart that did not stop calling for her missing granddaughter. There were notes about the first few days of the search, about the times he thought he had found clues, and also about the moments when he almost lost hope, but she never let discouragement win. With each page he reaffirmed his conviction that one day, somehow, the girl would return. And there, in the middle of the notebook, among sheets marked with old tears, there was a promise, written more firmly than all other words. The grandmother had trained the dog, her faithful companion, to recognize her granddaughter's smell, wearing old clothes, photos, objects kept with affection. It's kept. And he wrote with all the letters, "If one day she comes back, he will know. He goes to her, and I'll leave something for when that time comes." The girl's hands began to tremble. The tears, once contained, now flowed freely. The words jumped off the page and tightened his chest. It was difficult to understand everything. The grandmother not only believed but prepared for her return. She didn't give up, never, even when everyone said it was in vain, even when the years passed and no one believed it anymore. She followed. She wrote. She left everything ready so that if one day life decided to do justice, the girl would know that she was never really alone. The pain of not having arrived in time to meet her again in life pierced the girl's heart with a silent needle. But along with this pain was something new, a force, a feeling she didn't know or perhaps had forgotten belonging. She was not a mistake of the world. It was not invisible. She was loved. She was expected. And now, even in silence, even on the other side of life, her grandmother had managed to fulfill what she had promised. The dog was there. The wallet was delivered. The notebook was found. Everything went on as if each piece had already been carefully put in place, long before everything happened. She closed her eyes for a few seconds, holding the notebook to her chest, as if hugging someone she can no longer see. A different heat ran through his body, warming him to the coldest points in his history. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel empty. The silence of the room was deep, but inside it 1,000 voices seemed to whisper that now everything would change. Because she had been found. Because now she knew that her story was not only one of loss, but also of reunion. The dog, lying on the carpet, sighed loudly. The girl looked at him gratefully. He had accomplished the mission, not with words, not with explanation, but with loyalty, with presence, with a fidelity that only true love knows. And she knew at that moment that that notebook was not the end. It was just the beginning of something even bigger. There were more truths hidden there, more clues, more stories sewn between the lines of pain. And now, with her heart open and her eyes steady, she was ready to continue. Because understanding that she was sought was one thing, but to find out why it was taken, it was something she still had to face. Afternoon fell slowly over the old house, pouring a golden hue over the walls that held memories too much to fit in time. The notebook still rested on the girl's lap, and although her eyes were fixed on the letters, her mind was already following other paths that were beginning to open up in front of her like a road that finally ceased to be dark. Beside him, the dog breathed easy, as if he knew that fate was, at last, fulfilling what it had promised in silence. The neighbor, attentive to the girl's every reaction, observed with the care of someone who understands that certain wounds can only be touched with the tips of the fingers and the willing heart. Between the pages of that notebook, in addition to the memories and nostalgia, there were also guidelines, indications left by the grandmother about what should be done if her granddaughter ever returned. It wasn't just a love letter to the past, it was a map for the future. One of these notes talked about a place, a shelter, but not like the others. A small, discreet foundation created by her own grandmother years before, with some people who believed in the power of starting over. There, children in vulnerable situations found more than shelter and food. They found dignity. The girl read about it with teary eyes, feeling that each page unfolded a new part of her story that she didn't even know existed. With the help of her neighbor, the next day, she reached this place. A simple gate, painted white, with plants growing on the sides and children's voices echoing in the distance. The sound of laughter moved her in a strange way. How long had it been since I heard something so sincere? The dog walked beside her with the same confidence as always, and as she crossed that gate, she felt something inside her slowly open, like a stuck door that finally gives way. The fear still existed, but there was also something new. The feeling that perhaps there she could finally be who she was. Upon entering, she was greeted by a calm-spoken man with a warm smile. He didn't ask what she had in her pockets or where she had slept the night before. He asked her name, but he asked truthfully. As someone who really wants to know, as someone who is ready to listen, and not just listen. The girl hesitated. For a second, his name seemed distant, as if it had been left somewhere in childhood, but when she uttered it in a low voice, she felt that it belonged to her again. It was as if, by saying it there, she was being returned to herself. he was given. A small room with a made bed, clean clothes, and a window through which light entered. The dog was allowed to keep her. The foundation also cared for rescued animals, and everyone there seemed to understand that this companion wasn't just a stray dog. He was part of her healing. He was given a cozy corner by his bed, a bowl of fresh water, and another of food that he devoured with discreet happiness. They slept together that night as if sleeping after going through a storm that was too long. The following days were of estrangement, but also of discovery. The girl had a hard time trusting. He was always alert, watching his every move, as if he expected it all to be a trap. But no one was screaming. Nobody pushed. No one told her to shut up. Gradually, she began to allow herself. She began to explore the spaces, to sit down to listen to the stories told by other children, to accept invitations to activities. One day, he entered the small reading room and found a children's book with drawings of trees and colorful houses. She remembered her grandmother telling her stories before going to sleep. He sat in the corner of the room, opened the book and read in silence as if he were sewing the loose threads of his own past. She was enrolled in a nearby school. She had difficulty keeping up at first, but one of the teachers was enchanted by her curiosity. He realized that she learned quickly even with the lost time. Her attentive gaze, her notebook always open, her fingers dirty with blue paint, everything about her showed will, and over time it began to go beyond content. He began to write short texts, stories about a girl who lived on the streets and had a wise-eyed dog. The words came out with force. They were not regrets, they were seeds. The pain, once mute, now took shape, and when she wrote, she was cured. The other children began to listen to her attentively. Some came from similar realities, others did not know what hunger was, but they knew what loneliness was. There was something about her presence that inspired, not because he was strong, but because he was no longer afraid of being vulnerable. When she told her story, her eyes lit up, not because it was easy to remember, but because now she knew she had survived. The dog was firmly by his side. He aged slowly but remained alert. He became the foundation's mascot. He was called Guardian by the children, and even without understanding, he seemed to like the name. He accompanied the girl to school, waited at the gate, returned with her. Wherever she was, he was with her. It became a symbol of loyalty. Everyone knew he wasn't just a dog. He was part of the reason it all started again. The girl, now safer, started to help with the care of the shelter. He bathed the dogs, helped organize the library, read to the younger ones before going to sleep. His story, once silenced by the street, was now told aloud. Invitations began to arrive. Small conversation, circles, local events. They wanted to listen to that girl who one day slept on the floor of the city and now taught others to dream. She did not seek applause. I just wish no one else felt what she felt. And for that, she was willing to turn the little she received into a lot for others. There were still unanswered questions. There were still nights when silence brought back difficult memories. But now she had a place to lie down. He had a place to return to. He had a name, a voice, and a history. And most importantly, he had faith that even what seemed lost could be found again. Life, little by little, sewed back the parts that seemed too torn. But there was still a loose point, something deep in the chest that insisted on pulsating, as if a piece of the puzzle is still out of place. And it was there, in the space between discovery and reunion, that she began to feel the call she still needed to answer. Time, with its implacable delicacy, has taken its course. The girl, previously silent and cowering before the world, flourished. Each season left marks on his face, but also strengthened his presence. It grew with the same strength as someone who was once exposed, but survived the drought. Her hair now longer, her shoulders firmer, her eyes still immense, but now attentive to her surroundings. I no longer carried the lost gaze of someone seeking shelter. Now he carried the firmness of someone who offers shelter to others. The foundation had become more than a temporary home. It was part of its identity. It was there that she learned to say good morning, without fear of being ignored. There she discovered the pleasure of being called by name, of being expected, of having a place at the table. And it was also there that he understood that his Story, however painful, could be a bridge to other lives. He started slowly, helping with daily chores, then in reading circles. But it was when a group of newly arrived teenagers asked to hear her story that something changed. At first she hesitated, but as he told it he noticed something in their eyes, a flame. It was no pity, it was identification, and for the first time she felt that her pain made sense beyond her. It didn't take long for her to be invited to speak in public schools, at community meetings, in spaces where vulnerability was common, but hope was scarce. There was nothing rehearsed in his words. He did not memorize catchphrases. She just counted. He told how it was to lose everything, what it was like to give your last piece of bread to a hungry dog, how he came back, and how, because of that, everything changed. He spoke of his grandmother, with tenderness, of the notebook with reverence, of the house with nostalgia. He spoke of fear, but he spoke even more of courage. And above all, he talked about kindness, the one that seems small, but that carries an immeasurable strength. The children listened to her with attentive eyes, many adults too. In his words, there was truth. In his presence, there was peace. And beside him always he walked, now older, with his fur speckled with white, his steps slower but his eyes still alive. The dog followed her like a silent guardian. In every place where she was received, he lay down at her feet without making a fuss, but imposing respect for her simple existence. He was a living reminder of the origin of everything, a symbol that walked in flesh, blood, and loyalty. She started, visiting shelters where children were still waiting, sitting on sidewalks with young people who had lost their way, listening to stories that resembled hers, and remembering that, even on the days when she no longer believed in anything, someone did. Sometimes, what made a difference was not the beautiful speech. It was the gesture, the look without judgment, the bread divided. One afternoon, while walking through a community center that offered meals to the homeless, he saw a girl sitting on the opposite sidewalk. He was alone, his knees against his chest, his eyes fixed on the floor. The image cut through the air like an icy breath. It wasn't just empathy. It was memory. The teenager crossed the street with firm steps, holding a bread that had just come out of the oven, the same one she had helped prepare with the children of the foundation. The aroma still escaped through the corners, sweet and warm. He stopped before the girl, crouched down and spread out the bread with both hands. The other looked up slowly, surprised. There were no words, just the gesture. A simple gesture. Repeated. But there he carried everything. I carried hunger, memory, faith, and choice. It was the same gesture she had made years ago, and now, for the first time, she was the one who offered it. Not because there was too much, but because now he knew what a gesture could do. The bread was accepted with trembling hands, and in that silent instant, two stories intersected, like threads intertwined by fate. That same day, when he returned, home he sat in the garden of the foundation next to the dog. The sun touched the walls with sweetness, and the sound of children running filled the air. She looked at her companion on the journey, who was resting quietly beside her, his head resting on her legs. She ran her hand over his fur with affection. In his silence he said more than any words. It was as if to say, "You've arrived," and indeed it had arrived. Not to a physical place, but to a certainty. That it was no longer the girl who asked. Now it was the one he offered, the one that reached out, the one that gave back to the world what it once received, even if in the form of a simple piece of bread. Because sometimes everything starts like this, a gesture, an instant, a choice, and when guided by love, even the simplest gestures are capable of changing entire destinies. This story only got here because someone decided to record it. A local journalist, touched by what he saw in that girl and in the dog that followed her as shadow and light, felt that the world needed to know that. It wasn't just about overcoming. It was about presence, about what happens when someone, even having so little, chooses to share. When life is marked by a small but true gesture, and that's why, if you've made it this far, maybe this message has also found its way. Write in the comments, "I believe in the power of kindness," just so I know that you stayed until the end and felt it with me. If this video touched you in any way, leave your like, because it is with these signs that we understand that we are on the right track, sharing stories that really matter. And if you want to continue receiving stories like this, which warm, inspire, and make us reflect on what really has value, subscribe to the channel. It will be good to continue this journey with you here. There's a video here that tells a similar story. Sensitive, profound, the kind that stays with us after the screen goes dark. Click and stay with me there.